The Dutch government has just decided to ban trade with products from Israeli settlements. But here's the surprising part. According to a new legal analysis, the Netherlands may not actually have the legal power to do this on its own. Welcome back to our Think Short interviews. I'm Olimpia Galiberti from Think, and today I'm joined by Raouf Leraar, Policy Director at Israel Allies Foundation Europe, whose new legal briefing examines whether this proposed boycott is actually compatible with EU and international law. Welcome, Raouf, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
So let's start from the beginning. How and what has the Dutch government announced, and why has it sparked so much debate?
Well, the Dutch government announced that it will, per decree, so not through a parliamentary treatment, that it will boycott products from Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria, the Golan Heights, and also the eastern part of Jerusalem, because they feel that it is the right thing to do to pressure the Israeli government, because they do not agree with Israeli policies in Judea and Samaria, on the Golan Heights and in Jerusalem, and therefore they are looking for ways to pressure the Israeli government to change their behavior. That's basically the background of these measures that they're proposing. But there is a huge problem with these measures. The Dutch government is relying on a law from 1977, the Sanctions Act. It's a national act, and it's actually the only national legal tool the Dutch government has to impose measures on trade. And this is actually what they're using as their basis for sanctioning and boycotting products from Judea and Samaria, which also means, of course, that Dutch companies and Dutch organizations are not allowed anymore to sell them, to import them. It also goes for products, it also goes for services. And what the Dutch government is also trying to establish is that it will also be impossible or punishable by law if Dutch organizations do get these products from other EU countries. That's what the Dutch government is trying to propose, trying to implement. And it's very, very problematic because, in short, it goes against EU law. It goes against a part of international law. And what we actually see is that the Dutch government is using economic and financial measures and sanctions to obtain a political goal. And that is, of course, very, very strange in some way, because political goals are usually obtained through political negotiations and dialogue and not through economic sanctions. And that's also something that EU law is very, very clear about. That it is actually not allowed at all to do this. And the real question is going to be, will the Dutch government listen and comply with EU law, or will it turn the other way and choose to ignore and violate EU law?
That's very interesting. But actually, who actually has the legal authority to do it? So to ban these imports?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So since actually the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009, let's say the common commercial policy of all EU member states is the exclusive competence of the European Union. So the exclusive competence means, of course, that member states are not allowed to propose, to implement, to adopt measures that go against the common commercial policy of the European Union. But there is also a very strange thing going on. If you read the common commercial policy and also the jurisprudence, but in fact, the common commercial policy itself, the common commercial policy is meant to regulate imports and exports from outside of the European Union. And also part of it, of course, is the internal market of the European Union, where goods and people and services can transfer freely without any obstructions. Now, the common commercial policy is meant to also protect the internal market. So let's say if a third country from Africa starts to export huge amounts of, let's say, butter, and it will disturb, let's say, disturb the internal market of the European Union, then the commercial policy can be invoked to protect the internal market and also to protect producers from EU member states. So what we can conclude from this example and from the common commercial policy in general is that the common commercial policy is only meant for commercial trade measures. As soon as trade measures are being taken, like sanctions, as we see now with Israel, then you cannot even use common commercial policy, because it clearly states also that if the, let's say, commercial measures like sanctions are used for political goals, and this is exactly what the Dutch government is doing, and it has also stated it in their own proposal for these measures, that it is in fact wanting to boycott these products to reach a political goal, being to change and the behavior of the Israeli government and to pressure Israel related to their behavior in Judea and Samaria and in other areas. From the moment that the goal becomes political, it moves to another section of European law. So it is not relevant anymore for commercial policy. From the moment that it becomes political, the goal becomes political, it becomes part of the common foreign and security policy of the European Union. Now, and this is where we see a huge tension between political goals and legal competences. Why is the Dutch government trying to use the common commercial policy to invoke these measures, to invoke these sanctions? Because if it relies on the common foreign policy of the European Union, then the foreign ministers of all 27 member states have to agree on these sanctions with unanimity. And unanimity is not reached on this topic because there are countries within the European Union that will object these boycott and these sanctions. We are expecting that the Czech Republic and Slovenia will vote against. This means that trade sanctions cannot be invoked on a European level. Now, the Dutch government says the situation is so unique that we see the necessity to invoke national measures. But the conclusion that the situation is unique, which is also very debatable, by the way, but let's say the situation is unique, that doesn't mean that you have a legal ground to use to use commercial policy, which is an exclusive competence of the European Union. So this is very weird. And we thus, and I conclude, see a clear violation of competences by the Dutch government, and the short conclusion, and of course we will talk further about it, but the short conclusion is that the Dutch government is not allowed to do this.
That's very interesting. Thank you for highlighting this. So basically, they choose to adopt a national measure based on common law and European law, but there's no European law giving them this national authority to adopt a national measure. So is there any national, let's say, ground for which they're taking this measure, or even under like a national point of view, there would be ground to take this kind of decision?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. The Dutch government is relying on the Sanctions Act of 1977, as I previously mentioned. So this Sanction Act basically says that the Dutch government can take and is allowed to take national measures based on obligations, on international obligations from treaties, international decisions, but also non-binding international recommendations. That is what the National Sanction Act says. Well, and we have these non-binding recommendations, right? We had the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice saying that Israel is not allowed to be in Judea and Samaria and on the Golan and in Eastern Jerusalem. and should leave. And part of this advisory opinion was that the advice was that national members, national states, have to do everything to, let's say, contribute to this goal. This is what the Dutch law is relying upon. The Dutch government is relying upon, but the advisory opinion never mentioned sanctions. And the fact that the advisory opinion is motivating member states to comply with the opinion of the International Court of Justice doesn't mean that there is a legal ground to do so. And it also doesn't mean that it supersedes European law. It doesn't. Because the International Court of Justice can give a non-binding recommendation. And yes, it has some legal value, even though it's not binding, but it cannot violate in any way European law, because European law is actually, if we take the importance levels of law and non-binding conclusions, then of course European law is far more important and actually binding, whereas a recommendation of the International Court of Justice is not. So the Dutch government is relying on this, let's say, non-binding recommendation of the International Court of Justice, which was also followed by a non-binding resolution of the UN General Assembly, actually confirming what the International Court of Justice said. So the Dutch government is saying this gives us enough grounds to invoke this National Sanction Act of 1977 and to apply trade restrictions, boycotts to Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria, the Golan Heights, and Eastern Jerusalem. Now, this is very strange because they, in fact, are only allowed to do so, and this is also mentioned in the Sanction Act. They are only allowed to invoke the Sanction Act in 77 if there is some sort of danger for public order, public health, and national security. Now, the strange thing in the argumentation of the Dutch government is that the Dutch government is in fact arguing that upholding the order of international law, as they, of course, the Dutch government has to do according to the constitution in the Netherlands, but also from the International Court of Justice, they are actually equaling it with that they have to maintain public order. This is the argument. So then the next question is, what does importing products from Judea and Samaria, Eastern Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights have to do with maintaining public order? So from a political, but also from a legal way, the Dutch government is saying maintaining public order is the same as complying to the order of international law, to the international legal system. Of course, this is nonsense. The Dutch government is not allowed to do this. The Dutch government also doesn't give arguments why this is the same. And that makes this proposal of the Dutch government actually legally a very, very weak. And thus, I have to conclude that it seems as if the Dutch government is preferring to push their political views, their political ideology, their political motivation over existing EU and international law. And I think that is a very dangerous situation, because when you choose to ignore European law, then what will be the next step? I'm afraid that it will open a Pandora's box, and that from now on, also future governments can say, oh, well, if something doesn't comply with our political views, we can just ignore European law and do whatever we want. And that's not how European law works. So I think all in all, it's a very dangerous move by the Dutch government. Next to the fact that it's legally unsound, completely unsound.
And politically probably sounds a little bit anti-democratic and a bit discriminatory, as your your report stress in some points under
Absolutely.
trade law.
Also, the discriminatory point is a very good one because the sanctions law the Sanctions Act as it is being invoked now by the Dutch government has never been used to any national state since its implementation in 1977. And moreover, also when you look to WTO, the World Trade Organization law, then if you choose to sanction an area which we can call disputed, but you only sanction that area specific and don't look at all to all disputed areas around the world where products are being produced and imported into the European Union, then in fact you are also going against international trade law. And you're going against what the WTO, the World Trade Organization, prescribes. So this is another layer of cherry picking, I would say, legally and politically cherry picking by the Dutch government by violating EU law, but also violating international trade law, and this is very, very dangerous.
And seeing all these different layers of critical legal problems and political problems, what's next? Do you think this measure will adopt and will face major legal obstacles, or do you expect this proposal to survive the legal scrutiny?
Well, to be honest, for now we're in the political phase. So the Dutch government hasn't yet adopted it, and there is still an opportunity for members of the Dutch parliament to demand parliamentary treatment of this proposal. And I expect that to happen. So if Dutch members of parliament choose to do so, then you will have a full parliamentary treatment in the House of Representatives, but also in the Senate. And then it has to reach a majority. And then it becomes a law. But that is even more problematic because if it's not a government decree, but it becomes a law, which is, of course, weighing heavier in terms of legal measures, then the violation of EU law and international law becomes even more serious. So we're now still in the political phase. Of course, we are trying to see if we can do anything about it. We are informing as much people as we can about the illegality of this proposal. But if somehow and in some way the Dutch government proceeds with doing it and implementing it and adopting it, then I foresee that court cases will be started against the Dutch government, relying, of course, on the things we just spoke about. But the legal material, as you know, is often very much broader and more complex than we can, of course, discuss in these 5 or 10 minutes. But I think that if it doesn't, let's say if it survives the political phase and it goes into becoming really an executive order, as you can call it, then I think we can expect court cases against the Dutch government, because what the Dutch government is doing is discriminatory at first, and at second, it's violating European law. Third, it's violating trade law. And you cannot use, let's say, financial economic sanctions to pursue a political goal. That is also an exclusive competence of the European Union and must be decided by the foreign ministers of all 27 member states. And with this decree, the Dutch government is in fact ignoring all of this. And I think that is something that is dangerous, should not be allowed. And I hope that the Dutch government will come to terms with these arguments, because in the end, I think it's something that is very violating also democratic principles. And from the moment a government starts to violate its own democratic and legal principles, then we can develop into a situation that is very unpredictable and potentially dangerous. And I think we should do everything to prevent that.
Thank you, Raouf, for highlighting all these different crucial and actual issues. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.
Thank you very much.